Hi, I'm Nadhirah Sakinah Binti Zailani, and I will start with the introduction of the country we choose. So our country chooses the country Philippines. So to start, the literature in the Philippines has faced a gradual evolution since the colonization of Mexico and Spanish. Due to the colonization, literature started to incorporate various languages ranging from Spanish, English, and Tagalog. Literature has been widely known as a way to show feelings through creative writings and traditions during the period of colonization. Let us first know the poet behind some of the poems. So the first one is Jose Rizal, also known as Jose Portasio Rizal Mercado y Alonso Realonda, was born in the city of Calamba in the province of Laguna in the year 1861. He is known for being a bright child who is capable of acquiring various languages from a young age. The themes for my fellow children, the main theme of the poem is to stress on the importance of love towards the native language. The mother tongue is the symbol and identity that represents every country. Many have altered their dialects and slang as the colonies countries took over, subsequently diminishing the language of the country. The next theme is patriotism. The first important element in patriotism is to acquire the national language. In the poem, the poet urges the future generation to make use of the language. There are a few reasons on why I choose this poem. Why I chose this poem? Because most Southeast Asian countries have experienced colonization, and that includes Malaysia as well. All the countries in Southeast Asia have been colonized except for Thailand, of course. Colonization has given a very big impact on these colonized countries, especially in literature, and Philippines being one of it. And literature has become a medium in conveying messages in most of the countries with the same objective, which is to gain freedom. As a result, many people indoctrinated with a strong sense of patriotism and affection to their homeland. Therefore, this poem is selected as it relates with many of the Southeast Asia countries that have been through colonization. So for the interpretation, the first stanza highlights the importance of language. The poet who experienced Spanish colonization wrote the poem to empower the Tagalog language, as language is one of the medium towards liberty. In the first stanza, the bird refers to language in order to express the roles of language in securing freedom, as a means of speaking up in order to liberate oneself from colonizers. At the end of the poet highlights how every different nation has its own specialty, and the Philippines is no exception. However, the poet expresses his grief when he sees destruction, as people tend to forget their initial mother tongue. And the second poem is Memories of My Town from Jose Rizal, and the theme for the poem is childhood. The poet expresses his yearning desire to go back to the place where he had his childhood. He misses being a child where he does not need to worry about problems and burdens. He recalls the place, the surroundings, and the memories of his childhood life. He also misses the environment where he was brought up, where things are more peaceful and stress-free. His childhood is closely related to a place where he calls home, which is why the theme of the poem is childhood. So the reason of choosing this poem, Isang Alala ning Aking Bayan, otherwise known as Memories of My Town, is because, as the name suggests, the poem is about a town where the poet's childhood takes place. The poet highlights the natural beauty of the town and the preserved environment during his childhood. He wishes the environment to stay preserved without facing destruction. So the Southeast Asian countries are known for their beautiful land and peace that comes within it. So why I choose this poem is because the tranquility of living in the sea countries have always been highlighted in literary works, and this poem being one of the examples. This poem is selected to highlight the beauty of one of the lands in the Philippines, as well the childhood that is bound to it. As I've mentioned before, Jose Rizal is born in Calamba, Laguna, which makes the setting poem of this poem takes place in Calamba, Laguna as well. This place is described as nostalgic and beautiful. So this poem is about the place he was born in. The poet believes that the place shapes him as a person and instills values needed to be a decent human being. In addition to that, the poet expresses his desire to return to the town when he grew up. And aside from that, the poet misses the people that used to be around him when he was younger. The first two stanzas highlight the vivid details of the town he used to experience in his childhood. And in the following stanzas, Rizal describes the feeling of longing to a person which is believed to be his mother. He conveys his anguish at the loss of his mother's affection. The poet also incorporates details in which the poet is raised with Catholic upbringings, as the word church is mentioned. You can see in the poem. And in addition, he recalls never being sad and burdened with problems as a child. Then he expresses his grief, for he wishes to be in the same childhood and town again. However, at the end, he says his final farewells to the memories of his childhood. His only wish for the town is for it to always be cheerful and lively as his childhood.
Moving on to the next poem, which is The White Man's Burden. So the author of The White Man's Burden is Rudyard Kipling, where he was born in Bombay, India on December 13, 1865. At 5 years old, he was sent to England to study. But then he returned to India in 1882. A decade later, Kipling married to Caroline Balestier and settled in Brattleboro, Vermont, where he wrote The Jungle Book in 1894. Among a host of other works that make him hugely successful. Kipling was the recipient of the 1907 Nobel Prize in Literature, and he passed away in 1936. Next is significance of the poem. So the poem was crucial in legislative deliberations about whether America should acquire the Philippines island following the Spanish-American War because of its moral case for American imperialism. The phrase white man's burden is still used to justify Western invention as a racist excuse. Therefore, this poem is selected because it leaves a huge impact to the Philippines due to the colonization and imperialism. Other than that, this poem is chosen because of how the poet described white races as superior and culture, whereas non-white races are inferior and primitive. According to the poetry, which completely makes the Philippine citizen mad about the racism. Moving on to the themes, the white man's burden's theme is colonialism and imperialism. So the white man's burden portrays the conquest of non-white races as a selfless moral responsibilities on the part of white people. Other than that, the speaker apparently thinks everything he says about imperialism and colonialism are thankless tasks undertaken by white solely out of goodwill toward other races, with no hidden motive of profit, benefits, appreciation, or even gratitude. The speaker also believed that it is the white man's duty to pursue conquest, but he also realized that this pursuit may not meet expectation of the non-whites. So last but not least is the interpretation. So the poem does not represent conquest as a means for the white race to attain personal or national riches or power. Instead, the speaker defines white imperialism and colonialism in moral terms as a burden that the white race must take up in order to help the non-white races develop civilization. Because of the poem's influential moral argument for American imperialism, it played a key role in the congressional debates about whether America should annex the Philippine Islands after the Spanish-American War. The phrase white man's burden here remained notorious as a racist justification for Western conquest. So the 7th and 8th line of the first stanza mispresent the Filipinos as new-caught, sullen people, half devil and half child. So the last poem is Kundiman by Jose Rizal. So the significance of the poem is this poem is important for Jose Rizal since it shows how he loved his country when the Philippines was being colonized by Spanish. He wrote this poem to show how upset he is when he cannot stand for his own country since he was in Europe when the Philippines was in danger. So this poem was being chosen because it has a deep meaning about how someone was dissatisfied for not being able to help his country when it was being colonized by other country, and how Jose hoped that Philippines will get freedom like other countries too. The main theme in this poem is love. Kundiman in Tagalog means love song, which is a young guy serenade the woman he loves with the traditional Filipino love song. For instance, in Kundiman, Rizal utilized and penned it to demonstrate his love for the motherland while also expressing his abhorrence for the Spanish brutality and injustice that was evident at that time. The poem also demonstrates Rizal's optimism and hope since he believed that his nation will be free one day. The last part is interpretation. Traditionally, a kundiman is a love song in which a man serenades the woman he loves. Scholars believe that this word comes from the Tagalog phrase kun hindi man, which implies that people believe in higher who chooses whether or not something is suited for them. However, in his literary effort, Rizal created a kundiman to express his deep affection for his homeland. This poem illustrates his strong belief that the Philippines will one day be free of deceit and injustice. While he was in Europe, the country was under serious threats, and while being far away from the country, he expresses his positive views via his art.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Fadhlin Azhani and I am going to discuss about a short story entitled Ibong Adarna. The original author remained anonymous, but it is believed that was written by Jose Corazon de la Cruz. So Jose was a famous poet and an author during the colonization of Spanish in the Philippines. He was also known as Husang Sisiu, and he was a mentor of Francisco Balagtas, the author of Florente et Laura. There are two parts in the short story, part 1 and part 2. So let's get through the first part. So there was a kingdom named Bourbania. It was ruled by a king named King Fernando and his queen, Queen Valeriana, with their 3 sons, Don Pedro, Don Diego, and Don Juan. Don Juan was the youngest prince. So there was this one Adarna bird. It was a magnificent bird and quite difficult to catch. It is believed that mastered 7 tunes, which could make someone fall asleep or help them to discover from a serious disease. So one day, the king had a nightmare which his youngest son has been slain by 2 traitors. So the king felt sick of the idea, so he tasked his 3 sons to go and catch the bird. So the first prince, Don Pedro, went to the Mount of Tabor to find the bird, but then he failed. So the second prince went, but he failed. So the youngest one, Don Juan, took his turn. On his way to the Mount Tabor, he met an old man and helped him out. The old man gave Don Juan a tips on how should he catch the bird. Surprisingly, Don Juan managed to catch the bird and help to recover and turn his 2 brothers back to human. Don Pedro and Don Diego felt jealous of Don Juan, so they went back to the kingdom with the bird but without Don Juan. So once they arrived at the palace, the bird won't even sing a song until Don Juan showed up. The king learned through the bird's magical song that Don Juan has been beaten up by his 2 brothers. He decided to not punish them, but he tasked his 3 princes to watch the bird. Again, Don Pedro deliberately set the bird free. Don Juan felt bad and shocked when he found out the bird wasn't around, so he ran away from home. So this is the second part of the short story. Don Pedro and Don Diego found Don Juan at Mount Armenia. They decided to start a new life and live happily together at Mount Armenia. One day, they found a magical well. So they tried to get in the well, but again, Don Pedro and Diego felt Don Juan was the brave one here, so he decided to take his turn and get in the well. Surprisingly, he met two princes who were jailed by monsters. He fought the monsters and rescued the two princesses. Don Pedro and then Diego found out the princesses were really beautiful, so they helped them climb up and then cut the rope when Don Juan was trying to climb up to get off the well. So Don Juan fell to his death. Don Diego got to marry Princess Joanna, but Princess Leonora wanted to wait for another 7 years because she was into him. So once Don Juan free from the well and he was resting under a shady tree, out of nowhere the Adarna bird showed up. He said to Don Juan, "Don't you worry about not getting to marry Princess Leonora. There is still one princess, a really beautiful one that you can marry. It's Bria Blanca, who was the daughter of King Solermo in a kingdom Reino de los Cristales." So Juan didn't even wait for a second. He asked animals for direction to the kingdom. He wanted to meet the cruel king, and yes, he did. The king was really proud of his braveness and gave a lot of challenge for him. And again, he succeeded. He went through all of the challenges. So the king felt really mad. So he cursed Maria Blanca to creep like a snail, and so that to be forgotten by Don Juan. So Don Juan decided to return to Brabania, where his mother and Princess Leonora were waiting for him. Once they reunite, they set up the date for their marriage. On the day of the wedding, surprisingly, Princess Maria Blanca showed up. He forgot everything about her, and Maria Blanca explained everything about her existence. So Don Juan decided to marry her, and Princess Leonora agreed to get married to Prince Pedro. So they all live happily together. So that's all for the summary of the short story. Now let's go through the important themes of the short story. So there are 3 important themes in the short story. Let's go through each one of them. So the love theme in the short story portrayed by the love toward a family member among the 3 princes of Brabania. They still showed their respect toward their father and went to catch the bird so that their father could recover from the illness. So even they were really competitive. Another scene is where 2 princes took order from the king and went miles to Mount Armenia just to look for their youngest brother Don Juan. The second theme is forgiveness. Don Juan was the youngest child, but he has a nice trait in him. He forgave his 2 brothers even when they treated him badly. The last theme was war. So the war theme of betrayal in the short story portrayed through the character of Don Pedro and Don Diego. They left him alone in the well just so that they could marry the princesses. So there are 2 justifications of the short story. The usage of the short story in school helped the young learner to learn values and morals. So since I mentioned about the themes in the short story, they were all about love, forgiveness, war. So young learner could learn a lot from this short story. Then another one is its adventures in an interesting storyline caught the attention of all ages of Filipinos, with numerous of adaptation which also helped the local to appreciate Filipinos' creativity. So this short story has been adapted into numerous film, song, and dance. So this short story was first recognized in poem form, but then it didn't get much attention from the local. So they had to change it into story form so they could give more benefit to the local. But unfortunately, I couldn't find the poem form of Ibong Adarna. So that's all for this short story. That's it from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I will be explaining about another of a short story of Philippines. The name is Dead Stars, and it is written by Paz Marquez Benitez. So the author was born in March 3rd in 1894. She was an educator who was teaching at University of Philippines, and she was married to a man named Francisco Benitez. So the synopsis of the story. This story is about Alfredo Salazar. He is a lawyer and a 30 years old man. He is a bachelor, however he is engaged to a woman named Esperanza. She is a very beautiful and elegant woman, however she is impassionate, while Alfredo is a man who has strong desires. And then they have been together in a relationship for 4 years, however along the time the love has faded away somehow. And then Alfredo is not someone who cared much about his neighborhood. However, one day his father asked him to follow him to one of his neighbor's house, which is the judge. And then he meets a woman named Julia. So Julia is the judge's sister-in-law who came to the place and stayed at the judge's house as a visitor. At that time, Alfredo and Julia had conversations, and then Alfredo immediately become attracted to her, and he falls in love right away. And then right after the event, Alfredo finds that he always comes and visits Julia every Sunday after the Mass. Since Alfredo has been meeting Julia for as long as 6 weeks, he and Julia has become an affair, which Alfredo keeps a secret from Esperanza. One day, Julia tells Alfredo that she is leaving the town. She will be going back to her native village by tomorrow. Since Alfredo is afraid of losing her, he immediately expresses his true feelings and his love to Julia. But then he couldn't do anything about it because he's been thinking about Esperanza that has been waiting for him for a long time to get married. So he feels like he should not choose Julia because people will judge him for leaving Esperanza. After they got married, Alfredo expresses that he is not feeling unhappy with the marriage. However, he keeps on remembering and he could not forget Julia along the marriage. One day, Alfredo is sent to Julia's hometown for work. He insists in meeting Julia because he has been reminiscing the memories of him and Julia from 8 years ago. And then when he meets Julia, he finds that somehow his feelings towards her are gone. And then that is why he perceived that his love towards Julia is like the dead stars. From the context in the short story, it says that seeing the light of dead stars, long extinguished yet seemingly still in their appointed places in the heaven. So it means that Alfredo is actually content with his marriage, and he was only unable to get rid of the memories with Julia, but then he's happy with Esperanza. There are 3 important themes in the story, which is first is forbidden love. So forbidden love is about Alfredo and Julia's love, which is forbidden as he is an engaged man and soon to be married. He could not leave Esperanza and choose Julia over her because Esperanza is no longer young and she has been waiting for Alfredo to get married. Next theme is marriage and fidelity. So in the story shows the real life situation of marriage, and And then Fredo's infidelity towards Esperanza. He is not loyal, and although he is not choosing Julia over Esperanza and they have not done anything, he is considered as a cheater. Last but not least is responsibility. Alfredo is responsible of both Esperanza's and Julia's heart. This is because in Esperanza's case, she's heartbroken because she found out that the man that she loves and trusts has been lying and cheating on her. And then for Julia, Fredo made his decision and let Julia leave, and then continues with the marriage. Last but not least, I'll be explaining about justification of the short story. So I picked the short story because it is regarded as a development and achievement of Filipinos writers by almost the universe. This is because the short story that stars has been a great impact to English literature in Philippines, and it changes from the age of imitation to the age of adaptation and experimentation, because English was newly introduced in Philippines while others are struggling to master the language. The author has been using artistic words and manners and impressive blends of techniques into a unified storylines and tones.
Assalamualaikum. The film that has been chosen for our final project is entitled Goyo the Boy General. It was released on the year 2018. It is a historical film based on true story that happened in the Philippines, which is Mount Tirat War. The film was written, directed, and scored by Gerald Terrell. It is a sequel to the previous film Henry Luna that was released on the year 2015. About the backbone of the historical film, his full name is Jared Biacrucis Terrell. He was born in Manila on May 13, 1977. He attended University of the Philippines, Diliman, College of Music, and also the International Academy of Film and Television. He is also known as David Beryl, Ramon Ukid, Roger T.J. Ladro, and Pat Aronio in the industry. Next is summary of the film. After the assassination of General Luna, a young man named Gregorio del Pilar is appointed as the new general under Emilio Aguinaldo's governance. He then needs to find General Luna's former allies and kill them. One of the General Luna's former ally, General Jose Alejandrino, who exempted from the purge, talks to Mabini, a former constitutional advisor, regarding Luna's death. Mabini then asks him to investigate the case because he thinks that Emilio Aguinaldo was behind it. Aguinaldo offered Mabini a position, and then Alejandrino is asked to go to negotiate with the American high-rank officer regarding the war, but it doesn't go well. On the other side, the main character, Goyo, started to tackle Don Mariano's daughter, Remedio's heart. He is also known as a woman player because of his previous relationships with few women in another state. Goyo is also described as someone who had PTSD, as he always feels anxious and would think that he would be assassinated by the enemies. Soon after the failed negotiation with the American soldiers, they resumed the attacks. So Aguinaldo is forced to retreat and he flee with his family member. Goyo and other soldiers are assigned to protect him along his journey to flee. When they arrive Mount Tirat, Goyo advises a defense strategies so that the American soldiers could not reach them. They built armored trenches along the mountain route. Unfortunately, the American soldiers found the secret path to flank them. Goyo was shot by the American soldier and they surrendered. In the end,
on March 23rd, 1901, Americans captured Aguinaldo in Palanan Isabela, officially ending the war. Mabini also imprisoned in Guam, where he wrote his own chronicle of the conflict. The title of his article is The Philippine Revolution, where it demonstrates Aguinaldo's incompetent leadership throughout the history. Next is themes of the films. The first theme is war. The film is about a war that happened between two countries, which is the Philippines and America, in the year 1899 until 1902. Next theme is love. In this film, General Goyo is having a love relationship with Remedios, the daughter of Don Mariano. At the same time, the film is also about love for country, as the Philippine soldiers in this film is against the American soldier to fight for their rights and also their beloved country, Philippines. The film is chosen because we can see that war and colonization cause people to suffer. But with war, people can see how the leader protects their citizen and also country. This film also highlights the tendency of Filipinos to blind patriotism, where service to the leader of the country overshadows the service of the country itself. It shows that an incompetent leader will lead to failure of a country. That's all from us. Thank you.